Good morning to those watching in the United States and good afternoon to our viewers in Europe. My name is Johan Fleck and I'm the acting director of the Atlantic Council's Europe Center. And it is my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Atlantic Council's Europe Center and our colleagues at the Eurasia Center to this public event on assessing Europe's support for Ukraine. We are here today just over 7 months since Russia's invasion of Ukraine began. 7 months of brutal violence unleashed on the people of Ukraine. Vladimir Putin's war in Ukraine has shaken Europe to its core. The war has exposed critical vulnerabilities and mistaken strategic assumptions in capitals across Europe. Yet despite many having been caught by surprise, Europe has so far proven Vladimir Putin's assumptions about Europe's weaknesses wrong on just about all accounts. Instead of crumbling into paralysis and internal divisions, Europe and the transatlantic alliance have taken joint unprecedented action. The European Union and its member states have rolled out 7 packages of sanctions against Putin's Russia, including the de-swifting of Russian banks, freezing of Russian state assets, and closing of airspace to Russia. The European Union has approved military aid to Ukraine, a first for the bloc. Europe has fast-tracked a Russian oil embargo and rapidly diminished reliance on Russian gas, even in the face of a subsequent energy crisis and economic downturn. And individual Europeans, led by our eastern neighbors in Poland, Latvia, and other Central European countries have opened up their cities, towns, and homes to Ukrainian refugees. As European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen promised earlier this month, Europe's solidarity with Ukraine will remain unshakable. But as winter approaches, as we enter a new phase in the war, as the energy crisis becomes more punishing and the threat of escalation grows, how unshakable will Europe's solidarity be? This fall, new leadership in Sweden and Italy, continued headaches from traditional Russia-friendly countries like Hungary, and growing political discontent across Europe, like we saw in Prague a few weeks ago, present a mounting challenge to Europe's unity and solidarity with Ukraine. Vladimir Putin will surely dial up the pressure on Europe. He knows which buttons to push, and he still has leverage. Energy prices will remain sky high, and he has promised retaliation for those who impose price caps on oil. The grain deal, which allowed Ukraine to continue shipping its much-needed grain to feed the world, is set to expire in October. And meanwhile, Ukraine is in need of large-scale economic and financial assistance to avoid hyperinflation and potentially economic collapse. As we approach a new inflection point in this war, Europe's continued support will be pivotal, and the Atlantic Council remains committed to exploring these critical issues. To discuss the future of Europe's support to Ukraine today, the Eurasia and Europe Centers at the Atlantic Council have brought together leading voices from across Europe's capitals. Welcome to all of our panelists. Before I turn it over to our senior director and my colleague at the Council's Eurasia Center, Ambassador John Herbst, to moderate this discussion, I would just like to give a special shout out to former senior director of the Europe Center and now a member of the French Assembly, Benjamin Haddad. Ben, we're glad to have you back at the Council, even if it is for a very brief time. Thank you again all for joining us. And Ambassador Herbst, John, over to you.
Jorn, thanks for that wonderful introduction. And Ben, greetings. So Jorn introduced our first speaker, Ben Haddad. We also have Jacob Heilbrunn, who's the editor of the National Interest. We have Jakub Janda, the director of the European Values Center for Security Policy. We have Ambassador Zygimantas Paviljonis, a member of the Lithuanian Seimas. And we have Dr. Sinikuka Sari, who's the leading researcher at the Finnish Institute of International Affairs. So let's get started. And I will ask a couple of questions to each of our panelists, and then we'll take questions from the audience. So, Dr. Sari, we'll start with you. There are indications that the help from the U.S., the EU is finding additional sources of gas and oil for the winter. And the EU is also having some success in reaching understandings with members to ensure that everyone receives due consideration with the limited supply. Is this true? And will Europe make it through the winter without diminishing support for Ukraine and easing sanctions on Moscow?
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Herbst. Sometimes I feel that us Europeans, we are really our own worst enemies. Because even now, when basically for the first time since the end of the Cold War, we have a common shared understanding on the logic of action of Russia, and the fact that Russia is using the energy weapon against us. And also when we are basically taking unprecedented common action in the field of energy security, the Western media is still busy painting a very nightmarish picture of weak Europe falling apart and being divided by Russia. And to be honest, with all the political turbulence going on in Europe, I don't see that this is what is happening. And somehow I hope personally that we would be more able to communicate our unity to our own publics and also to third states alike. We should take credit for the things that we have already achieved, and give credit, for example, to the European Union and the Commission that has actually reacted in a very balanced manner, very quickly to the developments on the ground. So basically, we have a good plan, and I don't really see any major problems of really going through the winter and continuing the support for Russia. And also, I would like to point out the fact that I think that Putin might be miscalculating. I mean, this is exactly what he's trying to achieve, to scare us off, for example, the speech last week. I mean, it was so clear that it was aimed at scaring off Ukrainians and Europeans alike into submission of some sorts. But I think that we are somehow past this point already. And in fact, the more Russia is trying to scare us and pull us apart, the more united we actually are.
Thank you. Okay. Ben, with substantial nuclear power, France is relatively well prepared for the winter. What has been Paris's role in helping the EU get through the winter without succumbing to Putin's energy blackmail?
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Ambassador Herbst. John, it's great to be here speaking with so many friends here at the Atlantic Council. I want to say that I share the optimistic note of conclusion from the previous speaker. I think that it is clear since February 24th that Putin greatly miscalculated by both underestimating the incredible will of resistance of the Ukrainian population, overestimating his own military capabilities, and I think underestimating the unity and strength of the European and Western reaction to the aggression against Ukraine over the last 7 months. It will have a cost. It is having a cost, of course, on world economics. But if you had asked me on February 24th, if I still thought that we would be holding tight on sanctions, that we'd be holding tight on weapons delivery, both Western and Central and Eastern European countries, I'm not sure I would have been that optimistic. And I know we can have debates about, countries that can do more in terms of weapon deliveries, especially, of course. I know countries like Germany and France, to a certain extent, are going through this debate. But the bigger picture is that Europeans are resilient, that there have been steps been taken to diversify energy suppliers to be able to disengage from Russia on both gas and oil, of course. Countries like France, for example, are close to 100% now, maybe more than 95% in terms of stockage of gas. We've relaunched, we are struggling a bit with some of the nuclear reactors that are not fully functioning right now, but we are relaunching our nuclear plants and nuclear energy. And we've been taking a lot of economic measures to also protect French citizens against the rising cost of energy. So most of that will be supported by the state rather than the households directly. The purpose of this is, of course, first to protect our citizens, but also to be able to keep this united front, as President Macron in the last few weeks have been saying. It is clear that this is what he called the price of freedom to pay, and that Europeans will stay united. I'll add a last point. I do think it's extremely, first, this conversation is important. I think it's important for all of us in our respective countries to continue to make the case for why it's important to support Ukraine, because Europe now, it's been the case since the beginning, but I would say more so over the last couple months, is becoming a front of this war. It's becoming an information front. It's becoming an economic front. As Putin struggles on the ground, and as Putin is increasingly isolated diplomatically, as well as we've seen during the Samarkand summit, he's clearly hoping that we lose focus, that we divide, that the rise of populist movements in countries like Italy or Sweden will also weaken the resolve of the European Union. So it is extremely important to understand that part of this war now is being played in our public opinions and democracies, and continue to just calmly stay united and explain why what we're doing is important, and stay the course.
Thank you. Jacob, until Moscow's large invasion, Germany was the hub for the import of Russian gas for the EU. And even afterwards, Germany lobbied for sanctions exemption to allow the export of turbines, ostensibly to keep Nord Stream 1 pipeline running. What has Berlin been doing to ensure adequate energy supplies for all European members, EU members, and might energy hardships weaken support in Germany for aiding Ukraine and maintaining strong sanctions on Russia?
Thank you, John. Germany has actually done quite a bit and performed what I would say is a total U-turn on the energy front. I remember how you were proselytizing against Nord Stream 2, and I never in my wildest dreams thought that you would emerge triumphant. But in the end, actually, you have. There are scattered protests in Germany calling to resuscitate Nord Stream 2. There was just one a few days ago. A couple thousand people showed up. But essentially, the government has pumped up its reserves, I think, almost to 90% for this winter. It is looking at cooperating in Spain and Portugal to have natural gas flows coming through Italy. Now, all of this is still very much provisional. You saw that the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz was just in the UAE, where he inked a deal for supplying natural gas to Germany. So I think that, and most notable, and probably perhaps the most shocking for the Germans, is that I read this morning in one of the German papers that the swimming pools in the spas inside Germany, that the heat will be radically turned down. So it's going to be a much colder, the Germans relish their spas. So they are going to be making a lot of sacrifices. I would analogize it, for me, it's perhaps not quite as severe, but the Russian tactics are analogous to the 1948-1949 attempt to starve out Berlin. And I think that in the short term, this winter, they have already failed. You will see German unity with its European neighbors on this front. Now, over the longer term, over the next couple of years, I think if this war drags on, then you could start to see more problems. Right now, Germany on the energy front, its businesses are suffering. They're contemplating moving some of their operations to other European countries. And Germany itself, with its energy transformation, faces big hurdles coming in the coming years. And they're frightened about going into a recession this winter. But overall, I would give the German response on the energy front, as in contrast to the military front, a decided thumbs up. Chancellor Scholz is coming under severe criticism inside Germany for not supplying tanks to Ukraine. So it's very interesting. It's another sign that the Germans are not buckling.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me just ask one quick follow-up question on those small demonstrations.
Sure.
They focused, you said, on Nord Stream 2. Might that have been a tactical mistake of Russia's friends in Germany, not to make it a broader issue than just Nord Stream 2?
I think they will, but the Nord Stream 2, in their minds, is a quick and easy solution. You just turn it on, and then the problems are over. But right now, I don't think you don't see anything massive in Germany as far as protests on the energy front. Both the parties the extremist parties, the left party and the AfD, do not command substantial support in Germany right now.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Ku, Putin's had a bad 3 months. Perhaps the only good news he had came about 3 weeks ago with the demonstration in Prague, which had about 70,000 participants. And that demonstration was against the strong support for Ukraine. Is this an indication of widespread opposition to government policy that will lead to change in the Czech Republic, or for that matter, more broadly in the EU?
Thank you, John. Well, actually, not really, hopefully. In the Czech case, yes, the demonstration was big. It was well prepared by the pro-Russian forces. But actually, if you look through the Czech parliament, with both chambers, the support for Ukraine is actually very strong. And the Czech government is among one of the most hawkish ones in Europe. So that's not going to change. We don't expect parliamentary elections for next 3 years. And the government coalition is pretty stable. So that's the good news. Currently, Czech Republic has the EU presidency. So we are actually chairing most of the EU meetings. And there are actually two main issues which we are mostly facing, or the Czech government is. One is Hungary, which is basically supporting Russia in every field they can, in the energy sector, in taking items out of the sanctions list in the future as well, and many of these areas. The second one is actually pressuring Germany to actually deliver the heavy weapons, because if you look through the military assistance to Ukraine from Europeans, what actually happened during the initial couple of months of the war is that Central and Eastern European countries actually delivered almost everything we had to Ukraine, and we are relatively small countries outside, except of Poland. So just to give you a number, for example, the Czech Republic government and private companies actually signed deals or delivered $2.2 billion US, and we are a country of 10 billion, which means that we are actually currently leading the EU in private companies delivering weapons to Ukraine. So there is a lot of this support, and I think the good news is that even if some of the governments in Europe would be actually changing some direction on their Russian policy, which is something what we might expect from Italy. Yes, it will be bad. It will look pretty bad. But if you look through what's actually happening on the ground, things which actually change the situation on the battlefield, that's the weapons deliveries. And yes, that you need governments to deliver it sometimes, or you need governments to actually grant export licenses, which is something what happens in many countries. But in many countries like Germany, it does not on the most important parts like the tanks, for example. So this is the area where we should be pushing for. And actually, if you really look over upcoming couple of months, what will be happening inside Ukraine? One is the humanitarian crisis, second is the energy crisis, and the third is actually the military assistance. And the military assistance is something what actually changes the situation on the battlefield right away. So that's what we should be focusing on.
Thank you. Okay. Let's see. Ms. Pavilionis, for years you have called for a tougher EU and tougher NATO policy towards the Kremlin. Is EU policy on oil and gas adequate to get through the winter while maintaining support for Ukraine? And will other EU cities see major demonstrations against the EU policy in this crisis, like the demonstrations we saw in Prague?
Well, thank you. Thank you also for inviting this great discussion with a lot of friends with whom I traveled to Kiev and to Tbilisi recently. Well, I would say like this. Yes, we've been calling EU and Americans to react strategically for decades. I remember first energy summits in Vilnius. Maybe it was 2005, 2006, when Dick Cheney landed in Vilnius and he said, oh, energy will never be used now like a weapon against democracies. But the problem is that we react. I agree completely with a lot of speakers. This is like Russians now are trying to take Berlin or Paris or Vilnius. By the way, tomorrow in my parliament, we have a in confidence procedure against my energy minister, the same picture. But I would say we are much better than just to react. We need to build strategies. And instead of reacting and fixing something in a hurry, like Germans now are building all those great LNG terminals, though I remember how difficult it was talk when we've been building our LNG terminal and Germans said, no, no, it's an American invasion. You know, we have to better do it through Nord Streams. But so when I'm saying we have to be strategic, I would say it from Cheney to Biden. If Biden is calling for kind of community of democracy to be created, so you know, we are wise enough to decouple completely from autocratic states in energy supplies. We, little Lithuania, we do not buy no gas, no electricity, no oil. Yes, it's costly. We pay that price of freedom. But what if we all democracies, we would decouple completely in 2-3 years from those autocracies? And what they will actually do without our money? Nothing. They will collapse and kneel and ask, you know, for kind of change of the policies. And I think looking to new EU presidency, Sweden, that is self-sufficient in energy, this is the way we have to go. In Lithuania, we decided that we will be self-sufficient in 2030 by adding a lot of green. Though we had a nuclear dream, we decoupled from oil, we decoupled from gas. We wanted to have our own nuclear reactors, but Russians brainwashed us in a referendum and we failed. So nuclear, we lost. But if we get all those nuclears, greens, and all other technological enemies, guys, we have much more brains, much more money, and we can fix it strategically, not only reacting. But for this, I repeat, we have to decouple from all China's and Russia's and all other autocratic regimes completely, 100%, if we want to avoid wars like we have right now in Ukraine.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Sari, in May, when Helsinki announced its interest in joining NATO, Russia shut off gas supplies. How has Finland managed that? And in the long run, beyond Moscow's war on Ukraine and the current sanctions regime, what does this mean for the Russian-EU energy relationship? Is that relationship largely in the past?
Right. So I hate to disappoint you, actually, but I think that this gas cutoff may have looked more dramatic than it actually was, because, of course, it coincided with the NATO application process. But on the other hand, Finland was one of the EU countries that refused to pay for the gas in rubles. So therefore, I mean, we did expect Russia to cut it off. So we knew that it was coming. And also, I would like to point out, perhaps we are somewhere between Lithuania and Germany when it comes to energy security, because yes, of course, we have been believers in kind of interdependency, but never to the extent than Germany. And our energy security strategy has always, for a very, very long time, relied on multiple sources and multiple energy formats. So we have like nuclear, renewables, hydrocarbons. Yes, 100% of the gas that we have been buying has been coming from Russia, but the share of gas in the total energy mix has been slightly over 6%. So this is not very dramatic. So, I mean, we have always, we are very preparedness-oriented country, probably because of the fact that we are neighboring Russia and we have over 1,300 kilometers of common border with Russia. I mean, this is a fact of life that never can be forgotten. So I think that there are variations. I mean, even those countries that believed in interdependency and dialogue with Russia were not necessarily naive. I think that there were always plan Bs that were prepared. And also, when it comes to the public mood, let me just give you an example, because a little while ago, it was in the news that in fact the gas from Russia hasn't been cut off completely, but there has been some LNG gas coming from Russia based on old contracts. And how did the public react to this? I mean, there were demonstrations against receiving that gas. The Finnish public wants to cut off the gas and basically hydrocarbon relationship with Russia completely. So I think at least in the Nordic countries, I think that the situation is pretty straightforward. I mean, it's there isn't like massive kind of I mean, of course, no one can trust Russia, but I don't think that this is because of Russian actions. It's not like stemming from, you know, old hostilities, but I think it is just a very rationalistic reaction to what is going on. And I think for small countries, I think security is always above everything else, and good relations and dialogue and all that comes second.
I agree with you. This is all about Russian use of energy as a weapon and a rational response to it. But if I may throw you a curveball, to use colloquial American English, because you mentioned in your earlier remarks that you kind of dismissed Putin's nuclear warnings. As Putin's getting into deeper trouble in Ukraine, domestic problems at home, some people are now arguing that he's more likely to use weapons of mass destruction. What do you think about that argument?
I think we have to take it very seriously, and what I have understood that the US certainly has taken it very seriously and has communicated and has really leveled up its own nuclear deterrence against Russia and has communicated privately and publicly that it has done so. So perhaps my point in my first comment was really that yes, I think it's more likely to be a game that Russia is playing because it wants to really it wants to scare us off. It wants to have a reaction from Europe and from Ukraine, and somehow that we would give in, we would submit to Russia's demands. But just like the US reaction tells us that the opposite might be true, that in fact we are taking it very seriously, so seriously that you know that Russia used to be able to play tricks on us, in particular in Europe, I think, with, you know, offering cheaper gas prices for certain countries and then perhaps cutting deliveries in some others, and that worked well and we were very disunited. But now when it's a question of really security and national security, that now is seen in a kind of European context more than ever. At least in Finland, I mean, our my country just applied for NATO membership. So that just tells the story that now I think even the kind of exceptions to the general mainstream European way of doing things are now kind of like getting to the mainstream, and there is a growing realization, I think, in Nordic countries that national security is European security, and we have to act together, and we cannot manage the situation on our own anymore because of Russia's very concrete threat to the whole of Europe.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, Ben, some observers believe that President Macron may still be interested in exploring diplomatic options, even while Putin controls vast Ukrainian territories taken since February. Is that true? And what is Paris's view of President Zelensky's determination to take back all the land seized by Moscow at least since February?
A couple points. I mean, first, I think President Macron has always said that he is open to exploring diplomatic dialogue with President Putin, while at the same time being extremely clear and explicit on denouncing the aggression, saying that there's clearly one aggressor, one victim, and fully supporting Ukraine all the way to victory and the reconquest of territories that have been occupied by Russia. President Macron tried before the beginning of the war to be a diplomatic bridge, went to Kiev and Moscow. Others, such as Olaf Scholz, did the same. I think it clearly, if there was any need, it proved once more that Russia was not interested in diplomacy, that Russia was closing the door to the negotiations over the Minsk agreement and choosing unilaterally the path of war. And since then, President Macron has sometimes continued to keep a channel of communication, but I would say, always coordinating with President Zelensky, always calling President Zelensky before and after, and coordinating with Ukrainians. And my impression of speaking with Ukrainian authorities is that they are not displeased with having at least some channel of dialogue with President Putin. Now, with that being said, should we be hopeful that it can lead to anything? I personally am quite skeptical, because it takes two to tango, of course. And we've seen that President Putin over the last few years has not been interested in diplomatic openings coming from Western countries, whether it's France, Germany, or the United States. But if we do this while staying extremely lucid about the kind of interlocutor that we have, and at the same, and always doing this while assuming a position of strength, which is keeping the united front on sanctions, so putting Russia under economic pressure, which is what France and other Europeans are doing, sending weapons to Ukraine so that they can defend themselves and recapture territory, and putting more diplomatic pressure on Russia. I think that's a role that France can play within the alliance. President Macron just gave a speech. We had the UN General Assembly last week, where he was once again extremely explicit about Russia's responsibility in this war, and also calling on so-called non-aligned countries to condemn and put pressure on Russia. President Macron basically saying, if you're non-aligned, when there's a choice between war and peace, de facto, you're supporting Russia's war on Ukraine. So I think all of these positions are not incompatible. The most important for me really being the constant connection, the constant dialogue with President Zelensky while doing so. Some of you may have watched either the full documentary, at least some of the excerpts, following President Macron and his team at the beginning of the war during the diplomatic process, before we can see on February 24th, President Zelensky explicitly asking President Macron to call Vladimir Putin. So, if I can be blunt, I know there's often some media posturing in the West about this, but diplomacy is a serious thing, and it's I think important that some leaders in some countries stay connected, as U.S. leaders have done with Putin over the last 20 years or so.
Thank you. Very complete. All right, Jacob. Putin decided to go for broke with his energy cutoff. Has this had an impact in Germany regarding its reliability as a supplier? And will this lead the EU and Germany to buy very limited amounts of oil and gas from Russia in the long run? Or will this economic pressure strengthen the political position of parties like AfD and Die Linke that are broadly interested in improving relations with Moscow despite its aggressive foreign policy?
In the short term, I think Mr. Putin has done Germany and the EU an enormous favor. Inadvertently, of course, but as I suggested, the polling numbers too, in the western half of Germany, about 66% of Germans still support sanctions against Russia. In the eastern half, it's a little more wobbly because of the communist past. I think that's about 44%, according to a recent poll. But there's been no sign of the Germans en masse going wobbly. In fact, when you mention the AfD, a couple of their members recently were visiting Ukraine and wanted to go into the Donbass as part of a Russian propaganda stunt. And there was such an uproar in Germany that they had to rescind that visit. So no, I don't think that Die Linke, which only scored 4.9% in the last Bundestag election, and the AfD dropped down to 10%. I don't think that these parties have the kind of traction right now that the upsurge we've been seeing in Sweden or Italy. In the longer term, if the German economy goes into a recession or worse over a protracted time, I'm saying more than six months to a year, then yes, if this war keeps dragging on, then you could start to see the political spectrum beginning to fray in Germany. But right now, I'm quite bullish on Germany, and I think that Putin has inflicted an enormous wound on the Russian economy. He has essentially severed his economic ties with Germany, which was an enormous importer, both of natural gas and oil from Russia. I am frankly staggered by the implications of this for the Russian future. I do not understand how it can survive in the long term by essentially amputating its relationship with one of the world's biggest economies in Germany. It makes absolutely no sense to me.
Thank you. You mentioned in your first remarks about pressure on Scholz regarding sending tanks to Ukraine. I know from some conversations I've had and from reading in the German media, they talk all the time that they're doing this in conjunction with the United States. In other words, they want to stay in step with the US. And we know the US has been timid at sending weapons to Ukraine, including thus far refusing to send tanks. Do you think that if Washington suddenly were to agree to send its own tanks, that would change the debate and the position in Germany?
It might, but I will tell you that Scholz himself is coming under fire from the CDU and from leading newspapers. There was an editorial that just came out last night denouncing Scholz for precisely this, saying that the Americans are imposing no obstacles to Germany sending heavy weaponry to Ukraine, and that Scholz is failing as a leader. If the United States were to send tanks, yeah, I'm sure that Scholz probably would tag along. But right now, he's being blasted. Okay. I don't think his position, by the way, is sustained. I'm not sure it's sustainable in the parliament, because both of his coalition partners, the Greens and the FDP, as well as the CDU is not a coalition partner, but they are all pushing for a parliamentary vote on this issue.
Thank you. Okay, Jakub, how important were Kremlin disinformation and influence networks to the Prague demonstration and for its broader efforts to weaken EU support for Ukraine?
Well, for the Prague demonstration, basically the pro-Russian networks actually organized the demonstration and led it. But I wouldn't overestimate it at this moment, because it's basically shouting at the streets is important, but it doesn't change policy overnight. But what is important are basically the corrupt ties which Russia built over many European political establishments over years, and they have not gone away. They are actually now being mobilized. We've seen it with Italy, with Mr. Salvini, for example, who will likely be in the next Italian government. We see it with Hungary, where basically the government of Hungary acts like a Russian asset for a long time. And we see it with other individual politicians who are unfortunately in power now. So not only disinformation actually changes public opinion, it does. The EU is doing almost nothing to actually respond to it. If you look over the last 7-8 months, what the EU has been doing on Russian disinformation, the response is basically nothing, unfortunately. There are a couple of member states who take it very seriously, but there's the usual bunch of Baltics, Poland, sometimes Czech Republic, Swedes, Finns, and basically that's it. So there is no major changes on that. The war situation did not change the defensive policies on the disinformation side, and on the, let's say, influence and corruption side. Yes, there has been sanctions. That's very good. But for example, look which European countries actually have something like the Magnitsky Act. It's the Baltic countries. Czech Republic is now putting it to our parliament, so we'll have it soon, and that's it. Nobody else has it outside of the UK and Europe, which is, again, that only shows you how bad it is.
Jakub, thank you. Let me just mention, when I was in Kiev two and a half weeks ago, I was told by a senior Ukrainian official that he had a visit from someone senior in Italy with the movement that's coming into power. And that official told him there'll be no change in Italian support for Ukraine. Well, I hope that's right. Okay. Mr. Pavilionis, Ambassador Pavilionis, what else would you like to see the EU and NATO do to ensure Putin's war on Ukraine fails?
Well, I would like to stay diplomatic, and I try to formulate it in some way to react to what my good friend Benjamin said about this dialogue with Putin. We are so much fed up to listen about those calls, really, because it's one thing when Russians divide us using our society groups, but we just talk about unity, about the winter that we have to stay united. And at the same time, we still continue speaking about some phone calls. On whose name those phone calls are done? If we are EU, so first of all, consult the whole EU. If EU wants to make those phone calls, because we don't want, we would veto first. You can tie us, you can shoot to us, but we will never speak with killers who kill our brothers and sisters each day. How many, mass graves you have to find to continue calling? And the best dialogue with killers is Nuremberg 2. Nuremberg 2, because now you have some Anschluss going on and you still speak about dialogues. And the best dialogue is, your surface to surface missiles, army tactical missile systems from Washington, our defense industries. Let's rise it up. Dear French, dear Germans, dear Swedes, you have powerful military industries, rise it up, defend Ukraine, ship everything, because this winter will be historic. I don't know, I have a feeling that actually Putin will fail much earlier than we expect. Usually nobody expected when Soviet Union fell. No expert predicted it, but we have this strange feel. This winter will be decisive, so give everything. And now coming back to something else that I want to focus us all. Well, we just agreed on candidate status. This was a historic decision, my friends, really historic. But in order it wouldn't just stay open great words, more or less some kind of words that we promised to Balkans in Thessaloniki summit in 2003, it should turn into accession talks. I'm looking to my Finnish friends, and I still remember Helsinki European Council decision in '99 that opened accession talks with Baltics. And you turned Lithuania, every stone is changed. We are happy, we are rich, we are stable, we are freedom capital. Do the same for Ukraine. We will ask Swedish presidency, the same Carl Bildt party that did it for us, do it for Ukrainians. And last point, I'm looking to my dear American friends. You know what? Vilnius NATO summit is coming. Let's correct Bucharest mistakes together. Because if your friends are just talking freedom and democracy, and you do not draw the red line for Russians in your great organizations that should defend freedom and democracy, those are just blah, blah, blah. Thank you.
Okay, that was very, very clear. Ben, would you like to respond at all?
No, but the truth is, look, I think, and Ziggy knows it. We were in Kiev together, thanks to him, by the way, and the great work that he's doing with United for Ukraine. And I'm hopping on a call with United for Ukraine after this call, so he knows that we agree on much more than this debate. Look, I mean, the truth is, I think it's a very difficult question, and I wouldn't say I necessarily disagree with the scenario that you're depicting. I also think there are alternative scenarios. And I think that as long as we stay united within the alliance, having some actors that keep a channel. You know, to be fair, it was before the war. I want to put a huge caveat, but when I met with President Zelensky in January and I asked him, you know, what do you want from us? What do you need? The first thing he said is, I want to sit down with Putin now. Once again, this was before the war, and this was at a time where he was, you know, a pragmatic leader who was trying to find a diplomatic solution when Putin was not interested in it. But he was saying, you know, if you ask Erdogan, ask Biden, ask Schultz, ask Macron, diplomacy is with your enemies. And I think there is a tendency now in the commentariat to believe that if you talk to someone, it gives him some sort of a respectability, or it gives him some sort of dignity. You have diplomacy with your adversary, and you do it, by the way, by putting pressure on him, maximum pressure, to make him understand that this war is a complete dead end. And so you send weapons. So I'm all in favor of increasing weapons delivery from both the United States and Europe. I'm all in favor of continuing sanctions and making sure they bite. And I do believe that they're really starting to bite, by the way, which is something else that we need to tell our public opinions in our own debates. But keeping this, it is getting your hands dirty in a way. But I do believe that it's important. I'll give you just another example. You know, I mean, when Holbrooke was negotiating with Milosevic in '95 during Dayton, you know, on the one hand, he was calling the Pentagon and saying you have to bomb here, and then he was going to have conversations with Milosevic. It was diplomacy backed by not the threat of force, but by actual force. So, you know, in this, I may be more of an old-fashioned realist, or whatever you want to call it. But once again, and you know, to be fair, you're not wrong in saying that this should be coordinated with Europeans. But I do remember a EU Council maybe a year ago or so, where President Macron and Chancellor Merkel asked Europeans to organize a summit with Putin. It was vetoed by the EU Council, and that's fair. But at the same time, it's worth remembering that just a month before, President Biden had sat down with President Putin in Geneva to discuss arms control and deconfliction. And so, you know, I often find some of my European friends being much more critical when France and Germany try to, you know, conduct their own foreign policies than towards U.S. diplomacy. Although I'm looking at John Herbst, and I think he was quite critical himself of the Geneva summit. So, you know, I know that there are voices in the United States that are consistent on that.
Just for the record, I was not critical of there being a summit. I was also not critical of things that Biden said there. I thought what he said was good. The problem was on cyber, where he laid down red lines. The Russians crossed the red lines, and his response was weak. Okay, talking is not necessarily a problem. It's what you say that's critical. So we have questions from the audience. The first one is from Jean-Francois Boitin. Pardon me if I've pronounced the last name incorrectly. Isn't the result of elections in Italy a clear message that the European cohesion is fragile? Two of the leaders on the right in Italy are allies of Putin, yes? So let's see. Who shall we give this to? Jakub, what do you think?
I mean, it will be tough. It will be tough about how we move forward. But I mean, we all keep talking about unity, and that's good. But honestly, more important are the actions which we take. Unity by itself does not really bring that much to Ukrainians on the battlefield. What does bring much is actually the weapons, how we care about the refugees, how we pressure Russia, what are the next sanction regimes we are going to put up. And yes, there is a very little interest in Western and Southern Europe to actually bring new sanction lists to the game and to really pressure Russia. And obviously Hungary is blocking everything. So I'm afraid outside of the public discourse, what can we actually really expect on the EU level, regardless of the new Italian government, how much Russian it will be? And I wouldn't overestimate it. I would really say what we really need are heavy weapons to Ukraine in the next couple of weeks at maximum. That is something what makes the difference. What is being discussed, what will be said publicly at EU level meetings, yes, it's important, but doesn't change the situation on the battlefield. And those are actually the only things which matter at this moment. The second one, midterm, is actually the visa fight, I would call it, which is where basically countries in Central Eastern Europe are saying, no, we do not want Russian military aged men join the EU now. There's no strategic reason for that, and there is Germany and a couple of other countries saying we need to do it. So that's a big policy decision which will be taken. And honestly, it's only one-way stop, because once you open the doors, you cannot really close it, in a sense that they will be in the Schengen area. Those Russian men will not be POWs, so they will be able to basically run across the Schengen area. And it's a big issue outside of the military dispute which we are going to be facing. And I keep hearing it from the Czech government officials who are leading the EU meetings on this. And it's a big fight which is brewing and it's not seen visibly at this moment.
Actually, Jakub, we have a question from Doug Klain on that subject, basically saying, isn't it a mistake to close the border to Russians so we get those potential Russian soldiers out of Russia?
If I may respond quickly, yes. I think it is right decision to close it. First, if you because to make impact, we would need to invite hundreds of thousands of Russian military age men into the EU. That's practically would mean we will involve all the Russian intelligence agencies back to the EU. And there will be so much disputes and political domestic problems. They'll be fighting the Ukrainian refugees, which are hosting. It's really bad. And it will not be accepted by populations, at least in Central Eastern Europe. So they will not allow our governments in Central Eastern Europe to do it. So it's basically impossible to do it. And if Germany does it, regardless of actually the allies who are facing the real danger, who are our Baltic friends, Finland, Sweden, and others, it will be really bad. It might actually kill the Schengen area for a while, because we will need to reinstate border controls, because we do not Russian intelligence to come back after we spent months trying to kick them out. So it will be a strategic mistake if we actually open the borders to those Russian men. It would be great to allow them outside of Russia. I don't think Russia itself will allow it, but I think it would be a strategic mistake to invite them to the EU at this point.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Sari, do you agree with that?
Well, first of all, I think Finland is now joining Poland and the Baltic countries in banning tourist
Yes, that's why
visas.
I asked.
Yeah, so that will be probably later in the week that it will be implemented. But nevertheless, I mean, the decision has been made. I think that for us, the issue was really how to justify that. And apparently we are now justifying it slightly differently from the Baltic states and Poland, because basically we are not claiming that every single Russian tourist coming to EU area or Schengen area is necessarily like a danger, a security risk for all Europeans. But basically there are more political reasoning behind that because of this war and because of we need to support Ukraine. But then when it comes to, I think the debate is still ongoing when it comes to the men of kind of age of mobilization. I don't know. I mean, there is kind of arguments for and against. I think so far, military service is no grounds for political asylum in our country. So at least if the criteria don't change, I don't think that this will be an issue. And then, of course, all these rumors spreading around that perhaps on 27th, Russia will not allow men to cross the border. We will see how things develop. And I think I don't think that there is great eagerness, obviously. I'm just also wondering how the Georgians are coping with all these Russian men coming to Georgia when basically they have two unresolved conflicts with Russia. So an interesting topic that I don't really know all the details yet, but I will be looking at it for sure.
Thank you.
Very interesting question.
Okay, we have an anonymous question. What is the role of Kaliningrad in Russia's ability to sustain its war effort? And how does the EU view the movement of military goods through Lithuania? Ambassador Paviljonis, I thought you might want this one, but please, 2 minutes. So we get one more question in.
Well, we don't see it as a danger, and we don't like any kind of corridors created over our territory. I will stop like here, and I will maybe just use it also echoing completely everything what was said in visas. And just one sentence back on dialogue with Putin. You know, the West is very, of course, civilized, and they treat Putin as civilized. But as my good friend McCain was always reminding me, you know, what is Russia? It's the gasoline station run by mafia. So mafia takes dialogue like weakness immediately. It's just how they understand it. So if you want to be seen weak, and Putin to continue with his advance, do it, but you are doing a mistake. And better listen to the Baltics, as von der Leyen was saying in her State of the Union speech.
Thank you. Okay, Jacob, one for you from Jackson James. Do you think the German public is more susceptible to Putin's nuclear threats than other countries in Europe?
Probably, given its history, and I think that's why Scholz is quivering right now over the tanks. I don't think there's any way around that. I think but on the flip side, I think the Russian atrocities, the war crimes, the genocidal nature of the war has firmed up the German response. So there is that. By the way, can I say about Kaliningrad? I visited there in the early 90s. A beautiful area that has been destroyed by Russia, especially the countryside. I hope that if Putin does go down, as I expect he will, that in some form or other, Kaliningrad will become an international zone that is no longer controlled by Russia.
I think Immanuel Kant would agree. All right, last question, Ben, for you, from Paul Vanderen. Borrell stated last week that eventually we will need negotiations, but not now. The question is, what is the thinking on future security architecture for Europe? And please, 2 minutes.
Well, look, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that this war has ended the few remaining illusions that some of us had that Europe was living in a postmodern paradise where war was no longer possible, that violence was no longer used in international relations, or and that we could, you know, be free riders of other powers. So I do think that beyond this war that will end with Ukraine recovering its freedom and sovereignty, this will lead to a generational effort to rearm, to rethink strategically at a European level, to invest significantly in energy independence, which does mean nuclear power, renewables, diversification of furnishers, especially when you see countries like Russia using this as a geopolitical leverage, investing in our own technological autonomy, and having a strong strategic dialogue also in the long run with our American ally about what are our priorities, where should Europeans take the lead in their own security, where should the United States focus. I think we were all heartened in the few days that followed February 24th at the general awakening coming from Germany and other countries. It's very important that it doesn't stay one shot, and it doesn't stay just at this moment, but this leads to something much more durable. I would end it that way.
Thank you very much, and that's a wonderful way to end it. Thanks to all our panelists for joining us today, and for our audience for this very interesting discussion. And we will be on the air again on Friday with other events. Thank you.